This is the Between the Frames video essay series, written by Bianca and Austin, edited by Austin, and vocalized by yours truly, Bianca. Today, we are going to talk about Jennifer's Body, the 2009 horror film written by Diablo Cody, perhaps best known for her comedy/drama Juno. In the director's chair, we have Karen Kusama, who rose to prominence for her 2000 film Girl Fight, which received high critical praise. While Jennifer's Body flopped intensely hard at the box office upon its initial release, both financially and critically, it's become a kind of feminist cult classic in recent years. So let's look at what makes this film so great and why it seems to have gotten a second wind, despite it being an apparent flop. Spoilers ahead. Let's recap the story. Jennifer's Body is the story of Jennifer, who's played by the Sex Pistol Megan Fox, her friend Needy, who is played by Amanda Seyfried, as they try to maintain normalcy in their hometown after Jennifer is possessed by a succubus and overcome with the need to eat boys in order to sustain herself. So how did we get here? The story begins with a description of their hometown, the Devil's Kettle, a unique landmark which is very creepy, and it actually exists, and the town's named after the landmark. So what is the Devil's Kettle? It's this swirling vortex of water that is at the base of a waterfall, and the water that enters a tunnel in the ground is never seen again. It's unknown, both in the movie and real life, where the water goes. And in the film, they talk about how they've thrown multiple objects, they've thrown all sorts of things into the kettle, and none of them have ever resurfaced. And there is some debate as to whether or not there's anything mystical going on there. Recently Vice debunked it, but you know what, we'll never know. The point is, this is based off a real place where that's actually like that. So there's a link for more information in the description. It's a Vice article. Pretty good article. Anyway, the film establishes that Needy, the high school nerd, and Jennifer, the high school cheerleader, have been best friends their whole life. They're an unlikely duo. They go to a concert in a bar called Memory Lane to see an unpopular indie band named Low Shoulder. The bar burns down, people die, and the band and the duo cross paths outside the venue. The band convinces Jennifer to go into their van, despite Needy pleading with her to just go home. They choose Jennifer, believing she's a virgin, as a sacrifice to the devil in order for Low Shoulder to become the most popular indie band, because that's their idea of an achievement. But Jennifer pulls a fast one anyways, and she's resurrected as a succubus, because as it turns out,
I'm not even a backdoor virgin.
The rest of the movie follows the now tumultuous relationship between Jennifer and Needy, as Jennifer lures boys in order to satiate her newly acquired monstrous appetite for human flesh. And as the movie progresses, Jennifer is unable to keep up with her endless appetite for male teenage hormones, so she starts to look weak and ugly, or as Needy puts it,
ugly for her.
So let's start off by talking about the theme of trauma. The narrative of Jennifer's Body progresses because of the trauma that Jennifer experiences as she's sacrificed. Jennifer's killing underscores a lot of similarities with sexual assault, even though they didn't actually rape her. Before getting into the van, we see that the band is kind of forcing Jennifer to have a drink that she doesn't really want, and they're pushing the cup down. And she goes and she sits on the floor of the van and they drive away. And she repeatedly asks if they're rapists as they drive through the forest, and tells them that they should get someone who knows what they're doing and that she's a virgin. And so she's insisting that she's a virgin because she thinks it will protect her. She thinks guys would feel more entitled to rape her if they thought she was a whore, but in reality, they wanted to kill her, and they wanted to kill her because she was a virgin. We actually learn about Jennifer's sacrifice in a PTSD-like flashback in the middle of the film, as she describes how she became possessed and needy. The audience watches helplessly as Jennifer narrates her brutal death. The band members grab her and drag her to where she will inevitably meet her demise, which is a rock right next to the Devil's Kettle. And then they tie her down and proceed to stab her to death as they sing the 1981 classic 8675309, which they thought was funny because her name was Jennifer. If you're going to be satanic, you might as well have a sense of humor. Am I right, ladies?
Jen, it'll change your number.
The sacrifice itself, anyways, it's not sexual, but sex still is like clearly a prominent role in her death. The thing that attracts them to Jennifer is the perception that she is a virgin. They want to take away her purity by force. So it's her sexuality that saves her. It's her lack of purity that redeems her. So the non-sexual kind of definition of a fetish is an inanimate object worshipped for its supposed magical powers or because it is considered to be inhabited by a spirit. Let's contrast this with the sexual definition of a fetish. A fetish is also a form of sexual desire in which gratification is linked to an abnormal degree to a particular object, item of clothing, part of the body, etc. So this inanimate object is Jennifer. It's Jennifer. The creators of this film, I think, did that intentionally. They took something that was incredibly sexualized, aka the word fetish, and they placed it in a circumstance that it's not sexual, and yet it's rapey. It's got all the pieces except for rape. Anyways, so because they did all this, because they thought she was an object, because they thought she was a virgin, because they thought that she was what they wanted, they kill her, and she comes back as a succubus. And it's badass to think that she's redeemed because of her sexuality, but being reincarnated as a succubus has its drawbacks, and Jennifer needs to commit acts of violence consistently against the bodies of men in order to feel complete and alive. She's often seen cutting or burning herself to watch and marvel at her regenerative powers. Although her mutilation appears to strengthen her and remind her of her power, it's a direct result of the violent act against her, and so it looks like a form of self-punishment as she watches herself hurt herself over and over again without killing herself. She seems to trivialize it as though it's some kind of party trick, when actually she, in some ways, hates herself. Now let's talk about Jennifer and Needy. Jennifer and Needy have two connections. The first is this psychological connection that goes between minds, and it's kind of difficult to see where Jennifer ends and Needy begin. Jennifer is entering the van in the beginning of the film. We see Needy being her protector in that whole scene. We see Needy dragging her from the burning building and essentially like pulling her out. And then we see Needy pleading with her not to leave with the band. And we see her just try to hold it back, but in some way Needy is kind of like frozen by fear in the same way that Jennifer is. And it's clear that if Jennifer could like turn back time, she'd choose not to go through what she went through. So trauma in some way is psychologically experienced by both of them. So Needy's kind of in this state of almost something similar to PTSD, because here's this awful thing and she can't remember it. She doesn't know what happened, but something definitely happened, and there was a before and an after, and Needy's left to pick up the pieces. And Jennifer doesn't really know how to tell Needy what happened, and so she actually doesn't tell her until later on in the film, but we'll get to that. If we take it further, we can see that Needy and Jennifer might actually be spiritually connected. Needy and Jennifer blood bonded as kids, which we see in this one clip. We see that they essentially cupped their hands and held them, and they swapped a little bit of blood. Kids do it sometimes, it's not sanitary, don't do it, but Needy is upset and realizes that Jennifer has changed in some significant way because Jennifer doesn't have the scar on her hand. That was a symbolic reminder of the blood bond that they had. And we see at the end of the film that Jennifer loses Needy's connection with her as Jennifer loses her powers and falls to the bed once Needy rips off her friendship necklace and then stabs her bestie in the chest with an X-Acto knife, as one does. And earlier, if we backtrack, Jennifer tells Needy that her powers are a gift and not a curse that needs to be lifted. Needy insists that there's some way to lift the curse, and Jennifer refuses. It's ironic then that right before Jennifer dies, She bites Needy and gives Needy some of her powers. And then when Needy ends up in a mental hospital for seemingly murdering her friend for no reason, she's able to escape with ease, and she uses her powers to kill Low Shoulder, the band that started this entire mess. But she says something interesting in the scene right before she goes off to kill. She says,
Just might get lucky for once in your miserable life.
and so it's clear that when people have this power, they choose to embrace it in some way. Needy was once a person who wanted this all to go away. Now that she's got the powers, she's different. But she still is similar in the sense that she still wanted vengeance for Jennifer. So let's transition to a little bit less psychological, a little bit more gay, but kind of on the fence. As Needy's losing her virginity, she's visualizing somehow Jennifer, and knows somehow that Jennifer is eating someone and doing something evil the whole time that Needy is getting laid for the first time. So she's freaking out. She's seeing visions as she's running away from her boyfriend and booking it home, and she thinks she escaped Jennifer, only to find that the person she was running from ended up alongside her. On the one hand, when you lie in bed at night, it's representative of you being forced to live with yourself. And when Needy does this, Jennifer is next to her. But what isn't super psychological about this, and definitely more straight up sexual,
We can play boyfriend-girlfriend like we used to.
that implies a sexual past between Jennifer and Needy. And then we see Jennifer and Needy kiss, but right before, Needy tells Jennifer, I want you out of that t-shirt.
I want you that t-shirt.
Now, to be fair, she is wearing a shirt that says Evil Dead on it, which is a reference to a movie where people get possessed and evil prevails. So it makes sense that Needy would be like, take that shit off. Like, you're killing boys. That's not chill. And the problem is also that if she takes off the shirt, she's not wearing a shirt, and she is Megan Fox. So Jennifer's body really highlights trauma, female sexuality, and spiritual connectedness all through a film that has a bunch of horrific moments in it and paying homage to classic horror films before them. There's a lot of really exciting things about the film that we weren't able to cover in these main points, but we figured we'd still bring it to your attention. Now, maybe you guys can make something of it. So without further ado, here are some final points. We couldn't figure out what memory lane signified. Memory lane is the bar that burned down in the beginning of the film. It seems significant somehow. We don't know if Jennifer and Needy maybe have like a childhood friendship that was now about to be destroyed as memory lane was burning down. Like now it's tainted, the memory of her best friend. A more prominent one we considered. Memory lane was supposed to signify literally remembering the event. Jennifer and Needy essentially both don't have a memory of the night because it was so terrible for both of them. We also thought it was strange that Jennifer cried while getting ready for the dance because she realizes that she can't escape what her body is forcing on her, and she has to eat boys to sustain herself. She won't feel normal. Also, the idea of doubles runs along. Jennifer and Needy both don't have father figures. Jennifer and Needy both have absent moms compared to Chip's mom. Why are Jennifer and Needy the one with similar moms? Sebastian and the emo kid are like reflections of each other in some ways. And then there's even two football players. There's one football player who died in the bar. There's the one who Megan Fox kills in the beginning of the movie. We also thought it was interesting how Needy and Jennifer both liked their powers. They both, when they had the powers, wanted to let him take over. They wanted to embrace them. They wanted to experience them. So what does that signify, if anything? Anyway, guys, that closes off the first video essay of hopefully many from Between the Frames. We hope you enjoyed it. Austin and I sure had fun, so sure had fun making it. Like and subscribe and all that jazz. Thank you.